Ciao loves, welcome as we dive into the fixed star Sirius in the constellation Canis Major. And in this video, we're going to unfold the mythology from Egypt to Greek and the Roman Empire. Touch on the importance of this star astronomically, its effects on our Earth, and its effects in terms of spirituality or on human. So from the heavens unto Earth. Do you know that this star signifies abundance, fertility, and for the Egyptians marked the new year or the time of regeneration? It is the brightest star in our northern hemisphere, and according to the Greeks, who named it, its immense brightness, called Sirius, means sparking, fiery, burning, flamboyant, or the scorcher. It's 25 times brighter than our sun and over twice as big. This is why when Sirius has its heliacal rise or rises just before sunrise, it begins the dog days of summer. Across the Mediterranean, this point, the dog days of summer, would increase heat. It would increase what is said to be craziness, both amongst the canines as well as amongst humans. This increased heat would make us crazy, but marked a very specific point, not only in regeneration and abundance, but also in its significance on this earth and within our souls. Now, this great star located in the constellation Canis Major, which is why it's called the Dog Days or the Dog Star, is connected to many goddesses and gods. In some contexts, it's directly connected to Isis and Osiris. In other contexts, it's connected to Sothis and Anubis, or the dog-headed god. From the Roman context, it is correlated to many Roman myths and Greek myths, and we'll dive into that deeper. But let's begin with the Egyptian canon, because for the Egyptians, the heliacal rise of Sirius marked a new year. It is the point when Osiris essentially rose from the underworld, and it is the marking of when the Nile would flood the earth. And for the Egyptians, 3 months out of the year was flooded, or they were said to be underwater in the underworld. Sirius has a 70-day absence from the sky, which mirrors the hiding of Isis from Seth in order to protect Osiris. The return of Sirius signaled Osiris's revival via the Nile's flood. And because when the Nile flooded with the rising of Sirius, we have abundance. The crops were watered. Fertility was welcomed. Now, from Sothis, Sirius was dignified or deified as Sothis, who is the soul of the goddess Isis. And during its heliacal rise, the first visibility before dawn, was around July 17th. I'm going to come back to this, but this directly correlates with the 6th lunar month in the Roman calendar. So in the latter parts of July, towards August, we had this symbol of fertility, this symbol of rebirth, and it was marked with the new year. Sirius's transit is 365.25 days, so its orbital period. Now, when its orbit, 365 days, coincided with the solar transit of 365 days, this was named as a Sothic cycle. For the Egyptians, you can see that Sirius was the timing of their calendar. It corrected their civil calendar and also deemed when pharaohs were in power. Pharaohs were said to be born during a Sothic year. And again, pharaohs were born when Sirius and the sun were aligned in their transit, which is a direct correlation to its celestial birth. So pharaohs were deemed as a descendant of Isis and Sothis, or from the pyramid text, it was stated that when pharaohs were born during a Sothic year, they were the divine king. Their birth was a celestial birth, legitimizing their place as a king on earth. The other correlation with Sirius and its importance is the Temple of Alignments. Because of its connection to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, It was orientated towards Sirius. It described Isis and Sothis, a bathing of the New Year's light, a mingling with the father of Ra, the sun, or this is where we see the correlation of the Sirius orbit with the solar transit. The star is connected to Anubis, the dog-headed god, because Anubis, this jackal-headed or dog-headed god of death, depicted in hieroglyphs as early as 3285 BCE as the guidance of souls from the afterlife. Now I want you to hold on to that, because here we have, turn around, the full cycle of the year, a connection of souls between Isis and Sothis, the connection of the resurrection from the afterlife with Anubis, the god, the jackal-headed star, and this Canis Major, Sirius, the bright star in this constellation, being the dog star, Canis. The rising of heat, the rising of the Nile, fertility and abundance, this resurrection of the soul. This will start to play out as we go deeper into the Greek and Roman mythology. But let's go a little bit deeper into the myth and the astronomy. Because in Canis Major, as I mentioned, which is 6 times larger than the brightest star in the night sky, and it's 25 times brighter than our own sun. This rising period at this point marks 365 days. And its initial rise begins the rise of heat. This rise of heat scorches. It almost lights the torch. It ushers in the new birth, the rising of the soul. Sopdet, as I said, is connected to the heliacal rise of Sirius. And this goddess is directly connected to the rising of the Nile, its connection to Sirius. And though certain texts will directly connect it with Isis, because also in the Roman calendar, it is one of the months where Isis is connected into the Roman rituals. There's only 2 months where this happens. Yes, we see this because the Roman Empire was connected to Egypt, especially during the Cleopatra era, and we have this connection of these 2 lands. So naturally, the religion and the belief systems commingle. And in order to bring people in together, what is a better way than to bring their belief system in unity? But in my humble opinion, it is the goddess Sopdet that is the energy of regeneration. And her connection with Isis and Osiris is the ambient. While some gods and goddesses represent specific processes, others are states of consciousness. And this state of consciousness we can see very clearly with this star permeate our natural world, not only in the rising of the Nile, but if you were outside the Nile, how does that have significance in Greece and in Rome, aside from the goddess and the god worship? We see that the heat increases. Just as the Romans had sacrificed dogs in the beginning of this period because they were said to be in honor of the dog star, but also because humans and dogs were said to go crazy. This heat was to take us into a different conscious state, a madness, if you will. And yeah, heat is maddening, but let's go deeper. Because this ambient, this process, this alteration state of consciousness is exactly what Sirius starts to induce. We have a regeneration, a new transference of souls, an abundance of fertility, a different embodiment. And Sopdet in this process is represented. Its connection to the goddess of the sky, Nut. So here we have a direct connection of the consciousness that shifts to our celestial mother, the star overhead, and the underworld beneath. We have this passage of souls and the connection to our celestial right. The Greeks noted that the rays of Sirius turned the summer heat dry. It was said to make plants wilt and men weak. It was recorded that women would become aroused. And even Hesud and the work and days marked that this was the period of time to protect your plants and to stay inside. Homer marked this star. So across time, we have great poets and philosophers that had a specific note on this star's significance amongst man and nature. Across the Mediterranean, the Romans said that the rise of the dog star would be accounted for the increased heat. It was crazy. It would make everybody for a week long insane. But it was also the period of their 6-month sextilis. Sextilis is an important month. It's one of the months, as I had mentioned, that really notes back to the the Egyptian connection. But its rituals are a direct correlation to the effects of this star and the effects on our natural world. And so if you aren't in the Northern Hemisphere, it doesn't really correlate as much. But for those of you that are in the Northern Hemisphere and the 6th month begins, it's another way for us to understand the meaning of the constellations and the direct correspondence of heaven unto earth, maybe without even visibly seeing that star. Because sometimes astronomy is confusing and it's not as visible, especially if you live in a city where light is just so profuse even at night. So we aren't as connected to these heavenly bodies and these stars as the ancients were. But it doesn't mean that their effects are not still influencing life on earth. So when we enter into the 6th month, the dog days of summer, or the heliacal rise of Sirius, we can follow its connection by following the Roman 6th month and its rituals, which will signify that direct effect of the celestial bodies to man and life on earth. So let's dive in. This star was also a guardian. And we see this guardian, this passage of time, in numerous Roman holidays. And those Roman holidays, I'd mentioned one is the sacrifice of the dog, but the second most important would be the honoring of Diana during the full moon, or what the Romans called the Ides. The full moon would mark Nemoralia. Nemoralia is a celebration to Diana, and it marked fertility. Because remember, the crops in Egypt would become fertile. There was the late summer where we had a second wave of abundance agriculturally. And we have Diana, the goddess of the hearth, but also representing, we have this passage between the underworld and fertility and life on earth. And that's really what sextilis in this month is. It's the underworld to fertility and abundance on life on earth. And then on the 17th to the 19th day, we have two particular rituals that really will signify the star, Portunalia and Vinalia. And let's go into that. Because Portunalia is connected to Mundus and Ops and all these other things. Portunalia, the root word is port. You know this in your modern vernacular. Port means where ships come in, right? It's a portal. It's the doorway. It was the opening of the gates where the waters would rise. It was the opening to the underworld, or what later in the month we called Mundus. The descent and the rise, the descent of the goddess, the rise of the sun, the resurrection of the soul, the rise of fertility. It was an opening between worlds, both consciously and as well terrestrially. Here lies the connection to Hecate. Hecate in Greek was the goddess of magic, but if we go deeper into the Chaldeans merged us in the 2nd century, and they showed us the cosmological significance of Hecate, which represented the goddess that was between worlds, the goddess that holds the key, the portals. In this context, we see that when Hecate becomes present around this period, she is carrying a torch and a key. Further significance that she opens the doorways, the portals between consciousness, between souls, between the transcendence of regeneration. And she carries a torch. Remember, Sirius means scorcher, torchbearer, fiery one. So we have this opening of the underworlds. We have this goddess of magic, but for the Chaldeans was a goddess of transcendence. She moved us into higher realms, and she guided the souls with her torch and the key into beyond space and time. And she had her dog. Sometimes her dog is depicted as a three-headed dog known as Sirius, and sometimes it is a single-headed dog. Here again, the dog-headed star, Anubis, this transcendence between worlds. So let's journey deeper. As Hecate guides us, and we have this correlation to the dog star and the dog days of summer and the transcendence of the soul into abundance, and the rise of the soul back into earth for fertility. We have the guardian of the gates. We have a journey of the soul. We have a resurrection that rises and a new generation. This new generation was honored in the Roman times as Vinalia. Vinalia is it's a ritual for the wine, but I want you to really think about wine. Because from the Greek context, wine was taught to Icarus. And when it was taught to Icarus, it was to reach the gods, to reach a different conscious state through wine. Wine also has generations, right? We have a vintage, a direct correlation of wine to the next generation. It goes through a fermentation process. And for the alchemists, we know this very much as a transformation of the soul, the passage, or a purification into a higher realm. So wine is not just the beverage that we drink, but it's a strong significance in terms of changing consciousness into the divine realm, a transcendence of its embodiment of the sheath, the grape, a transcendence into a higher state. And even as said from Hesiod, but when Orion and Sirius come into Midhaven and the rose-fingered dawn sees Arcturus, then cut off the grape clusters and bring them home. The connection to the grape and the next phase of transformation. In the Roman association, Canis Major is the constellation where Sirius is situated between the dog Myra. And Myra is the dog of Icarus. Icarus was taught how to create wine. This story becomes prominent when Spica has its heliacal rise. Myra is the daughter of a Titan. And in Canis Major, Orion has a dog. And this is represented by Canis Major or Sirius. So Myra is the key between Sirius, the eyes of Isis, the Egyptian myth, Myra, the dog, that we connect the Roman, the Greek, and the Egyptian meaning into a cosmical understanding that this star, the goddess, the resurrection, the abundance, and the transference of souls, it is a portal that we pass through. Not just an increase of heat, a rise of a river, but a transference of our consciousness. It is a regeneration of ourselves, a destruction that brings wave to abundance. It is a maddening, but a clarity. So Hecate and the opening of Mundus, which for the Romans took place on the 24th lunar day of the 6th lunar month sextilis, was an opening of the underworld, a passage of the soul, a resurrection of the God, a welcoming of the abundance, an initiation into fertility. Sirius marks a pinnacle time in which the soul rises into a new state of abundance, a new state of conscious resurrection, and a new state of celestial correlation. I hope you look up just before dawn and see this glorious star overhead. Ciao, loves.